here's you do a couple days, 3 days worth of evasion of the enemy, and now you're out hiding. You hear some voices. You crouch down. You hide. You know they're people. And here we go, back to the book. A lot of crashing around came from the direction of the voices. I looked up and saw uniformed NVA soldiers pointing AK-47 rifles at my head. They shrieked something and motioned for me to stand up. I did. I was captured. I felt indescribably sick in the pit of my stomach as the world fell away. I'd been struggling for 3 days to stay alive. I was in miserable shape, but I had been free and I had options. No more. My soul was awash with anguish. I was no longer a free man. In that instant, I'd become a captive of the communist North Vietnamese army, a prisoner of war, another American POW in the long Vietnam conflict. I had no idea how long they might let me live, or if I was about to die. A couple of them were shaking. We stood in utter silence for a moment. They glared at me, I glared at them. For that tense instant, I didn't know if I'd be riddled with bullets or be allowed to live. One barked something at me I could not understand. Another joined in, then a third. I looked right into their eyes. I was an American. I would show them the best American fighting man that I could.
In the pitiful state that I was in, that's the best I could do on describing capture. It's impossible to really convey the full feeling of losing your freedom and being a captive. It's just indescribable. But I did the best that I could. I was in miserable shape. I mean, you read about the wounds that I had. In addition to those, I'd picked up some leeches that I'd been plucking off of my body. My face was covered with blood. My 3-day growth of heavy beard was sticking through because of my back injuries that I didn't even know till I got released that I had badly broken my back. I had no control of my bowels or bladder for those 3 days. So I was just an awful mess when those guys captured me and took me up that hill.
They finally get you to sort of like a camp, sort of the first interrogation camp. Or
they captured me. The jungle is so thick; they were only a few yards away when I stumbled upon them, and then they had been down in a stream filling canteens. These 5 young guys that captured me, and they took me almost an equal distance up a hill opposite, and I came into an open area. Still had the canopy of the triple canopy jungle. But the bottom was all open. There were hundreds of North Vietnamese soldiers, supplies, defensive positions. This was a major staging area for this battle that was taking place. And as I was trying to get away from the battle and get towards Kon Tum, I stumbled right into their staging area.
And you start getting the soft interrogation is what I put down here. A guy says, we found pictures of a pretty lady with your children in your wallet, obviously your family. And you say, yeah, I know you miss them and are very worried, and they are very worried about you. You follow the rules and you will be home soon. You will receive humane and lenient treatment. You will be allowed to go home. And I put that in there because that's a refrain that we hear quite a bit. Humane and lenient treatment.
That was a refrain. They would say it all the time, and during my whole captivity. Yeah, you do what you're supposed to do and cooperate. You get the humane and lenient treatment.
Of course, you weren't fully cooperative at all with them and what they're asking you. So they went from that idea. So they start stepping it up on you. And, here's an example of the things that they say to you. You are a war criminal, and the Geneva agreements do not apply to you. You have no rights, but we will still give you the deserved humane and lenient treatment. All you have to do is cooperate with us and acknowledge your crimes.
Yep. That goes back to your reading of the code of conduct that started this off too. Our code of conduct was different.
Right.
It said we are bound to give only our name, rank, service number, and date of birth. And the way that was taught and the way we understood it, that was all we could give was name, rank, service number, date of birth. And if we gave anything else, we had caved in and were cooperating with the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my stance. That was all I was going to give them, was my name, rank, service number, date of birth. You may get into some of the things that took place. I would just like to comment that there was nothing heroic going on at all. I guess a couple of things that were going on. I was trying to abide by the code of conduct, and I was in a state where I had been near death for days, was very near death at that moment, and was numb and just almost didn't care. It's hard to understand and believe, but almost didn't care at that point. And then I got so angry and aggravated with this son of a bitch that ended up being my interrogator from his initial soft sell, as you said. But his first words, he showed up. He was the only guy who had spoken English since I was captured, started asking me about myself, my condition, if I was hurt. And so I opened up with him about some of that. But then when he got into what was clearly an interrogation, then I clammed up. I would close these comments now with the fact that he didn't break me in that interrogation speaks nothing to my heroism or ability to resist interrogation. Anyone can be broken. And if this would have continued over time, I'm sure that he could have got me to do something with his brutality. Probably nothing that would have given him any useful intelligence, but he might have got me to do something. Yeah. So I was for those moments on those days of that initial interrogation, I was able to stick with my name, rank, service number, date of birth.
Awesome. Here's an example of that. Is back to the book. Here, please sign this. He handed me one of the sheets of paper and a pen. I looked at the paper. It was typed in English. As I began to read the words, my interrogator interrupted. This is simply a form that acknowledges your status. We need it so we can begin to process you for release, so we can send word to your family of your status. Please just sign. I read the words. I could not believe what I was reading. There was a blank place for me to fill in my name. The text said that I was an American war criminal who had been conducting illegal acts against the Vietnamese people, including biocide, genocide, and ecocide. I had dropped fire bombs and chemical bombs. I had killed old men, pregnant women, and babies. Biocide, genocide, ecocide, what a bunch of crap. I raised my head and looked into his eyes. No, I will not sign this. There, I had spoken. You must. I will not. His agitation returned now. You must. I glared at him. He got up and came at me. He smacked me across the face. You must. He turned to his sidekick and spoke quietly, and the man got up. At his direction, 2 guards dragged me up against a tree, a broad trunk of a tree. I'd been bent over since the crash, unable to stand erect. They forced me up into a straight sitting position and tied me to the tree. It hurt like hell. I couldn't keep my face from contorting in anguish. Now you sign. No. More orders. They pulled on the ropes to bring my arms closer together behind me. The pain in my back increased. New pain was introduced in my shoulder joints. More demands to sign. More refusals. The ropes tightened further. They moved my elbows closer together. More demands, more refusals, ropes ever tighter, more pain. I was uncontrollably grimacing and cursing. I would not sign. I could never consider signing anything like that. The brutality made me angrier and more firmly set against giving in. I could have been broken and made to sign eventually, there's no doubt. No man can resist forever. But this interrogator would not bring me to breaking point on that day. His demands continued, and so did my refusals. The ropes tightened more and more. Pain screamed through me. My anger swelled against this asshole. I began grunting an audible attack against the agony. The guards gave the ropes one huge last pull, which brought my elbows together behind me. I felt a pop as each shoulder dislocated. Pain shot through my torso, up my neck, into my head, and down my back, through my groin, and into my thighs. I've never felt such pain. My vision narrowed, and I nearly passed out. Sign! I could only groan and shake my head. The interrogator scowled angrily, turned, and left. I'm going to continue on. This is a little bit further on. And he's saying that he's given you one last chance to sign this paper and one last chance to cooperate. Will you? I'm going back to the book now. My head hung down, partly in exhaustion and partly in an intentional rudeness, not paying him any attention. I looked up when he finished. I saw his sadistic minion standing a few yards in front of me holding an AK-47 at the ready. Your last chance. The assistant raised the rifle and pointed it at me. I stared ahead and said nothing. No heroism was involved. I was wrung out at the end of everything I had to give. I'd been so close to death for so long, was so angry and so absolutely drained. A faint spark was all I had left. I felt numb, detached from what was happening. I was not resisting. I was just giving in to the flow of whatever was destined to be. That might be death. It might not. I'd seen an army training film years before showing the mock execution of a Korean War POW. I remembered that scene. The action of the trigger being pulled went over and over in my mind. Click, click, click. Bam! I flinched as the soldier jerked the trigger back, but nothing happened. No shot. No loud bang. No bullet ripping my skull or chest. Nothing. The soldier laughed. My interrogator smiled. I am done with you. You will be taken away from here.
Yeah, that was 3 days of just 3 horrible days, losing my freedom, going through that interrogation, being thrown down into a pit at night is where I stayed. It was one of their old abandoned bunkers. It had about 6 inches of mud and goo in the bottom. And that caused me a big psychological issue. That first night, closed in that darkness that night, I really had to fight to just keep my cool down there with a bunch of, there were centipedes and spiders and rats, and it was a mess. So I'd spend the nights down there and come up in the daytime for interrogation, back down in that hole, nights back up for interrogation. So what we read covered a period of 3 days before he finally gave up on me. And yeah, I had no idea what was going to happen. And even thinking back on it, it's just going through all that pretty much in just a numb state with that treatment. Yeah, my shoulders today still cause me problems. I had a son that ended up playing football for University of Washington many years ago. He's going to turn 50 here in April, so this was a number of years ago. But yeah, in high school, I'd throw about 2 passes, and that was it for my shoulders. Can't play horseshoes or anything. But yeah,
so it's something that definitely I've experienced doing these readings, and I've talked about it before. That, when I read something in my head and it kind of, I go, oh, that's powerful. But then when you read it aloud and you hear it, it's even more. And it's the same thing with, I know I sent you Jody Middick's, the podcast when Jody Middick was on.
Yeah,
and he said the same thing. He said to me, when you're reading it, it's like I'm hearing my own thoughts or something. It brought him back. And yeah, there's something about that. It's okay. It's like when you're reading it, it's sort of detached from reality, or it's one step further detached from reality. And obviously sitting with Jody, sitting here with you and knowing that this is you, one point that I make all the time when I cover these historical books, I always remind people that, because, people in this day and age, we're used to seeing movies. We're used to watching TV. And I always say that this guy that I'm talking about, this is a person. This guy in World War II, this is a person. This guy in World War I, this is a man. And so to have you sitting here knowing that this is you, it's I don't even know what to say to describe it.
Well, thanks, Jocko. And this has become an emotional experience for me, but it's important. And I think this is going to be an important podcast. I wrote that book. I finished it. It was published last April. I've not read that book since it was published. It was something to go through and relive all that to get it written, and so it's been almost a year. I haven't read the book. So we're going into detail, but this is good.
So you get turned over to some other guards,
Right.
and they start taking you on a walk. You're walking
Right.
to somewhere else, and you're in. You talked about the conditioning. By the way, you have a crushed vertebrae at this point, right?
Yeah, it's a badly broken back. One vertebrae is about completely crushed, damage to two other vertebrae.
Your legs swollen. I mean, you got all kinds of issue, and now you got to walk. And so I'm going back
with they gave me my boots back after those 3 days of interrogation. No socks, no laces, boots, bare feet. Okay, go ahead.
We had a old Vietnam SEAL when I got to SEAL Team 1 in 1990, and he would run barefoot all the time. And one day it was, hey sir, why you run barefoot? And he says, the first thing the gooks do, take your shoes. Got to have hard feet. I was like, okay, I guess I'm running barefoot now. I was thinking, because when I showed up at SEAL Team 1, I always joke about this. I thought I was going to the Vietnam War in 1991 when I got there. I thought, I'm going to Vietnam now. I was that, how you were, but I was a little off, historically. So that's the situation you're in. Going back to the book, they'd been saying a phrase. So as you're marching with these guys, they've been saying a phrase for the past 2 days that I couldn't understand. I thought it was Vietnamese. Go quick or die. As we pushed up the road, they walked behind me, poking their rifle barrels into my kidneys, my ribs, shouting with increasing urgency, go quick or die, go quick or die. And then after a while, for the first time, I understood what they were saying. Go quick or die. They had been taught one short phrase in English. It was all they knew, and they had pronounced it so poorly that it took me 2 days to figure it out. I moved as fast as I could, but I was at the end of everything I had. I struggled on. And I'm just noticing this. You're going to reach the end of everything you've had. I mean, you already were there.
Many times.
You're going to reach it again. You just reached it. It's incredible.
It's an amazing thing about human beings, what we have inside that we can dig down and grab a hold of when we have to, that we don't think we ever could have done it, but it's there.
And here's something that helped you. Back to the book, I found myself mentally reciting what I could recall of the 23rd Psalm. I repeated one line over and over in my head. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. That wasn't the only time during my captivity that the 23rd Psalm came to my lips.
Nope.
And please forgive me for, like, I already covered 3 days of misery. Now we're talking about, and I'm doing it in 3 minutes. Now you've walked for multiple days, suffering the whole time, and I'm going to fast forward through it.
Okay.
And I'm sorry. And
no, it's fine. I mean,
that's why people need to read this.
Buy the book
understand
and read it. It's all there.
So you arrive at a camp now. We arrived, back to the book, we stopped in front of one cage and the door opened. A guard pushed me in and I stumbled over someone lying inside and fell, tumbling into the ground. Pain shot through me. The cage was about 12 feet wide and 20 feet or so long. It could not have been more than 4 feet high. 26 prisoners were stuffed inside, all South Vietnamese soldiers. Heat hung in the cage, heavy and stale. The air smelled of filth and putrid wounds. People moaned in a constant dull rumble. The occasional wail was met with sharp shushes and guarded whispers. The doorway was shut and secured. I lay there, thankful I'd survived the journey of the past 3 days. What would become of me now?
Yeah, that was my first prison camp. The jungle camp. It was in the jungle, figure somewhere in northern Cambodia where the U.S. wasn't operating anymore. And it was a camp of many cages. There were about 300 prisoners in that camp, all South Vietnamese that had been captured in this offensive. One other American who I would meet later. And put in one of those cages.
Back to the book. My broken back screamed every time I tried to lie down. With my feet in the stocks So they'd put your feet into stocks, wooden bamboo stocks. There was no way I could lay on my side. I couldn't lay straight back, so I sat upright in the dark in agony. I thought of my family, thought of my day, of where I'd been, where I was now, and what might lie ahead. I hurt badly. Still, I had hope. I can live this way. I can do this. I can survive. I will survive. I sat there, thoughts drifting across the landscape of my life, shaped by these extraordinary circumstances. Eventually, I fell asleep, sitting upright that night, dreaming of what might become of me. I jolted awake. Something scampered across my legs. Something was on my feet. Something small, cool, and wet touched my arches and soles. Little rat noses poked and sniffed at my feet. Tiny teeth gnawed my pulverized raw flesh. My arms swung without command as I batted a large rat off my lap. Others scurried away. I screamed inside, lips pressed tightly shut, a muffled shriek of terror. I thrashed. My legs flailed but went nowhere. I wiggled my feet as well as I could in the socks and got the rats off. They fled into the night, only to return when I fell back asleep. They would return to torment me nearly every night in that jungle prison.
Yeah, I don't like rats to this day. Some of my kids just mess with me. I'll just bring up rats or the mention of rats. I hate rats from that experience, and that's not the beginning or the end of the rat experiences in prison. One thing that you did mention, though, that I'd like to highlight is hope. There was a phrase in there that I wasn't going to give up hope. Hope is such a powerful thing. It's there for all of us. We just need to grab a hold of it and hold it tightly. Hope was all I had for much of my time in captivity. Hope of surviving, and in that survival of getting back to my two young kids. Those two kids really played such a role in having me survive. My son, when I went over there, was 4.5 years old, a little over 4. My daughter was newborn. But when things would get really, really tough, I think of those kids, and however bad it was, I had to endure it to do my best to survive and get home to those kids.
Yeah, I definitely, that's one of the things that I specifically highlighted, was I can live this way, I can do this, I can survive, I will survive. I had hope. Yeah. And I read it just the way you just explained it. It hit me that hard. Back to the book. We sat for a few more hours. My cage mates, all Vietnamese soldiers, appeared a ragtag crew. Almost everyone had been wounded, some gravely. Filth covered their tattered uniforms. The whole place stunk of sweat, blood, infection, feces, and urine. We were all hurting, and some would die. Some cautiously whispered to their neighbor. Most, like me, just sat and stared. That's what I did. I sat and stared at them, sitting and staring at nothing. I wondered if I would go crazy here. Would I die here? What would happen first, insanity or death? I snapped back to what little grasp I had on reality. Hold it together. Focus. Spence and Vicky, we'll hike, we'll play. Get back home for those kids. You can do it. You can endure. I couldn't allow my thoughts to drift in dark directions. I forced myself into logical, structured thinking. I began planning a hiking trip with my family, a backpacking trip into the woods. I planned the route, the equipment loads for each. They'd be feather light for Vicky, a little more for Spence and Amy. I'd carry most of it. We'd eat dehydrated food, cooked around a small campfire. Delicious.
I'll tell you, dehydrated food then sounded awfully good. That was a gourmet meal, and I did that. I got back from my captivity. I spent some, and maybe we'll go into this later, and I won't get into all the details of hospitalization and medical and all that. But when I got released from the hospital, finally, took my family on vacation. Any guesses on what the first thing I did on that vacation?
Tell me.
Drove to the Olympic Peninsula and took my family backpacking.
You're a hard man.
To the Olympic Peninsula. I love, and I'm glad that I did. I mean, I always enjoyed the wilderness and the woods, and I would have been in much worse shape in captivity if I hadn't. But since then, I've loved the wilderness and the woods even more. I mean, I love every day, every beautiful day on God's green earth, but love the wilderness and the woods. We were assigned to Panama for a time. I don't know if you've been down there for jungle school.
Yeah.
And one thing, my older son, the little 4.5-year-old boy, was an adult by then. We backpacked. Well, we did a 3-day journey across the Isthmus of Panama, somewhere where nobody ever did. We just picked some place. We went from the Atlantic side or the Pacific side. We did mountain bikes first. Then we backpacked, staying in the jungle until we got to the Rio Indio, and it was dry season. We didn't plan it very well because we had to hike way down the Rio Indio before there was enough water to hire a guy in a cayuga canoe to take us out to the ocean. So, and that was just before my retirement. But I've always loved the wilderness, loved the jungle. And I don't know how we got on that thing, but okay, back to the book.
Well, that's awesome. And one of the things that I specifically highlighted was the fact that you would be drifting in these dark directions, and you would force yourself. Yep. And I talk about that too. I say mind control, not mind control like, hey, we're going to control your mind, but control your own mind.
Yeah.
And put your own thoughts in there.
Yep.
You can do that. And people just need to learn how to do it. Instead of when you start drifting off in the wrong direction, control your thoughts, get mind control. And I love the fact that you did that with such authority and power over what your brain was thinking.
Yeah, I think that's an important message. There's a much overused phrase. Are you a glass half empty or glass half full kind of guy? I really would advocate for you have to be a glass half full kind of guy to survive. And I think I might carry that argument further. If you want to have a happy, full, enjoyable life, you damn well better be a half glass full kind of person. There's enough problems and difficulties in life. If you want to go for the dark side, it's there. You can go to it. But there's enough positive, wonderful things that grab that bead of hope and go for it.
Absolutely. Back into the camp and back into the book. The camp provided a miserable existence on the edge of madness. All was filth and disease and suffering. Moans and wails of pain and anguish cried from the enclosures as we walked by. I caught glimpses of sick and wounded men inside cage after cage, their eyes white orbs of desperation peering from grimy faces through the din of the gray world inside. And now you're back in the stocks, sitting there wounded in stocks in a bamboo cage in an unknown jungle prison camp with death all around me. I began to wonder, how long can I endure this? Then my voice said out loud, as long as it takes.
Yeah.
Incredible. And here you meet, in this prison camp, you meet Wayne Finch.
Yeah, the other American who was held prisoner. He'd been captured March, April, May, a couple months before me.
And you, Wayne, the crew, now you're going to get put on a long march. They say, we're going to move you out of this prison camp. Do you know you're going to Hanoi at this point?
No. They pulled me out of my cage, and I found myself in the center of the camp with a group of 25 South Vietnamese prisoners. I think they were all officers, myself and Wayne. And they told us they were going to move us to a new camp, and the communist camp commander was running at the mouth, and one of the South Vietnamese officers was translating for us. But they're going to move us to a new camp where conditions would be better. I mean, in this camp, people were dying almost every day. Conditions would be better. We'd get medical care. We'd get letters from home. But it would be a very difficult journey. It could last for as long as 11 days, and we should try very hard to make it. That's what we were told. Now, the try very hard, the 11 days, I guess, was registering in my mind. The try very hard to make it really didn't fully register until we actually set out marching. By this time, my ankle wound was very infected. My leg was very swollen. It was so painful just to take a step. And yet I was having to take step after step after step. And as I got into that march, I was wondering how I was going to get through the first day. I didn't think I could do it. I didn't know how I could possibly walk for a day through the jungle. They had us tied loosely together, had our arms tied loosely behind our backs, no shoes this time. This was barefoot, and off we went. Somehow I made it through that first day, and the day after that, and the day after that. The trip turned out to be not 11 days to a new camp somewhere in Cambodia or even Laos or back into Vietnam. That trip took over 3 months, and I did end up in Hanoi at the end of that trip. That journey cost the lives of 6 of the South Vietnamese prisoners, and Wayne, the other American, died before we got to Hanoi, and I damn near died a number of times. That's all in the book, but by the grace of God, I survived and made it and got all the way to Hanoi.
He also got to know some of the South Vietnamese soldiers. One of them, Lieutenant Nguyen Dinh Dinh. Is that right?
Yeah, that's very good.
San?
Yeah, San. Lieutenant
San. And he was, obviously you formed a really good relationship with him.
Yes.
Here we go back to the book. We trudge out.
Let me interject one thing, because this is fascinating to me. It's always been. Well, I'll come back to it. Let me see where you're going to go with the conversation. Are you going to get to my relationship with him? And
yeah.
Okay. Go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go.
We trudged out of the valley up onto a rising ridgeline. There wasn't much talking. When we began to climb up a steep, long trail, I was already exhausted. I had to push hard to make every step. My swollen, infected ankle throbbed with pain. I wondered, is anyone else having this much trouble? How long am I be able to keep going? Only then did the words of the lead guard really hit me. As long as 11 days. Try very hard to make it. My being revolted. 11 days of this? How the hell am I going to be able to do that? In 2 seconds, I answered. Got to. As long as it takes. Reach down deep. Gotta go. Keep going. God help me. Wayne was stoic. He was in better shape than I was, but still it had to be tough for him. He just bore down and put out what was needed to keep on going. Some of the other prisoners did as well. Many like me had trouble. A number complained and a few cried. Other prisoners berated them. A couple of them fell down and whimpered, and the guards yelled at them, slapping, kicking, and hitting them with rifle butts until they got up. I thought, this is going to be a long 11 days. And this is just continuing way past 11 days. You're now just beyond that, continuing with the story. As the days continued, I became weaker and lost weight. Fevers followed waves of shivering chills. Might be malaria. I suffered from diarrhea, probably dysentery. My festering ankle wound hurt more. The swelling grew worse, aggravated by the journey. Leeches plagued me, sucking my blood and adding infections of their own. My right leg became a heavy, painful mass that I dragged along the trail. I must have been a sight. Though my wounds placed me in a worse situation, Wayne was sick and deteriorating too. He had some sort of jungle fever and lost his appetite. He quit eating regular rice, preferred only the crispy layer that formed right next to the surface of the cooking pot, what the Vietnamese called com che, or fire rice. Zan was having troubles too. Injuries from his shoot down, decline from months in captivity, poor diet, disease, and the daily toll of this horrendous march north. Every step of the way, our personal demons threatened our physical ability and mental willingness to press on. Everyone suffered. We looked like the walking dead, struggling to survive each agonizing mile of that march. Most of us stoically faced the challenges that beset us. Sometimes selfishness and self-pity erupted and tempers flared. Pain and suffering took its toll. The senior ranking prisoner in our group was Pham Van Than, a major in the South Vietnamese army. He tried his best to be a leader for the 25 South Vietnamese officers and 2 American helicopter pilots under the most trying conditions. The enemy gave him no authority to lead. I had a lot of respect for what Than tried to do. I felt the frustration he had to endure. Morale sunk lower and lower. Bickering grew rampant. Prisoners died. Than was senior, but most dismissed his efforts as they struggled to survive. And now there's a prisoner that goes down on the trail. The guards yelled back and forth at each other. They ranted at the prisoner lying on the ground. They barked orders to the rest of us. I didn't understand any of it. Zahn said softly but earnestly to Wayne and me, "Keep walking, no stop." We continued. One guard stayed with the prostrate prisoner where he lay. We walked on. After a short while, bang. One shot. Sometime later, the guard caught up. A dull sense of disbelief and shock overcame me. I had no doubt what had just happened. I kept walking as I cried. It was clear. If you could not march, you would die.
Yeah, and that message really settled into my mind at that point, and I knew if I ever got to the point where I couldn't march anymore, that would probably happen to me as well. The aside that I wanted to say about Song was, and it was mentioned, Song was a Vietnamese Air Force pilot. He was young and strong, and in my mind he was a lot bigger than he was, because he's still a short-statured Vietnamese. He was the A-1 pilot that I saw shot down on my way to Ben Het, that I asked for permission to go help rescue.
Yeah.
We put that together shortly after we started that march north of what he was flying, where he was when he was shot down. I said, my God, we were shot down the same day.
Yeah.
And,
and that's one of the reasons I included that piece, because it was such a coincidence or fate that you guys were. That was him, and there you were.
And he turned out to be such a good friend, and I owe my life to several people, Wayne Finch and Song especially, for what he did for me.
Back to the book. The journey was a nightmare, a horrid, soul-wrenching nightmare. It grew worse. Others fell out and died. Each step every day racked my body with pain. My infections became worse. Disease was taking me. I knew I was sliding closer to death, but I kept fighting as hard as I could. To keep my spirits up, I continuously thought of my family, of things I would do with Spencer and Vicky when I got home. Thinking of those two kids gave me strength, always bolstered my hope. My leg was now swollen to twice its normal size, dark colored, filled with pus. Long splits formed in the skin. Pus and bloody, stinking fluid oozed from the cracks. I dragged it along like a sodden club. Every movement lashed me with searing pain that kept my face contorted. I shrieked a silent cry within. Pain burdened a blackened scar deep in the center of my soul. Gangrene set in. My bloody dysentery worsened. I had chills and fevers. I would find out later that I had 3 different kinds of malaria. Each morning, I fought a battle to stand. And with all that going on, I tried to maintain a sense of humor. It was hard, but it was necessary. Spirit is the most important factor in survival. A sense of humor, even under the worst conditions, helps maintain spirit, and in spirit lives hope. I was determined to survive. Still, I owed so much to Wayne and Zahn. They helped me through the worst and were always concerned about me. They did all they could to help me. Zahn especially helped me remain positive, to be hopeful. As bad as things ever got, I never gave up hope. I mustered all my will each day just to wake, stand, and take a step. Then I fought hard for the remainder of the day to keep going, moving along the trail. I could barely walk, but somehow I did. I survived each day to open my eyes in the morning to the gift of one more dawn. The realities of my miserable world were clear. Death, our constant companion, stalked us, waiting for us to give in to its relentless temptation. That would be the easy thing to do. In normal life, you have to take some overt action to die. You have to kill yourself. As a prisoner of war, under these circumstances, that is reversed. You have to reach deep within yourself and struggle each day to stay alive. Dying is easy. Just relax. Do nothing. Give up. Then peacefully surrender. Stop gagging down food. Stop struggling to walk. Stop fighting. And you will die. Many did. So that's an incredible paradox that you point out there.
Yeah, but it's something that I saw, because it is. I mean, if you give up, then you just die. You stop eating and you die. It's hard to stay alive, and you need something to motivate you to stay alive. And I had it. I mean, I can't talk enough about those two kids. And when they listen to this, yeah, it's often hard to keep from getting very emotional. But those two little kids are probably the single most important reason that I survived, along with a lot of other things that helped. And that little 4.5-year-old boy will celebrate his 50th birthday in April.
And you'll be there with him, I hope.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I think we're getting to the low point here. The worst day of my life came a few weeks into this trip. I fought hard to continue the march, but I faltered. I dug deep inside myself for strength. There was nothing there. I dug deeper. I staggered on and faltered again. I struggled more. I reached deeper yet. I prayed for more strength. There was none. I collapsed. I got up and stumbled along. I collapsed again and again, and I got up again and again. I fought with all I had in my body, heart, and soul. I collapsed and couldn't get up. I could not will myself up. I was at the end of my life. The guard looked down on me. He ordered me up. He yelled at me. I could not. It was done. I knew my life was ended. Here, on this miserable, muddy jungle trail, it was over. Would my family ever know what had happened to me? Then Zahn was there, looking worried, bending over me. The guard yelled at him to stop. Undeterred, Zahn reached down to help me. The guard yelled louder, but Zahn's face was set with determination. In spite of whatever threats the guard was screaming, Zahn raised me up, turned, and pulled me onto his frail, weak back. He wrapped my arms around his neck and clasped my wrists together in front of him. The rest of the day, he pulled me along, my feet dragging on the ground behind. Part of the time, he was helped by Lieutenant Hung. Nong Li, a big impish brute, helped briefly, but it was Zahn and Hung who carried the burden that day. It was Zahn who risked his own life to lift me from death. It was Zahn who carried me and cared for me until we completed that long day's struggle at another wayside camp.
Yeah, I definitely owe him my life. Absolutely.
You end up falling into a river as well.
Yeah, that's the next day when we tried to set out, and I couldn't get back up. I mean, my ankle wound was so infected I could barely move that leg. And yeah, 3 kinds of malaria, dysentery, then 3 kinds of intestinal parasites, malabsorption syndrome. I was just in a bad way.
You fall into this river. Back to the book, Zahn and Wayne came off the log and down the high, steep bank to my rescue. They waded into the turret and pulled me back onto the bank. With Wayne shouting in English and Zahn in Vietnamese, they pleaded for the group to stay at the camp until I was able to travel again. They were ordered away. They wouldn't leave me. Guards dragged them away and forced them across the log bridge at gunpoint. They marched off with the rest of our prisoner group. Everyone believed I was left at that camp to die. So you get left by that group.
I do.
And you go to another camp where they kind of let you recover a little bit.
Yeah, well, I actually stayed in that camp, and for some reason the decision was, because I hadn't had any medical treatment to that point at all for months. And at that camp, with me laid up there, they got the camp medic and came over, and I got some shots of penicillin. I guess the only reason for the decision was we were along the trail and heading north, and they wanted to get me to Hanoi if at all possible. So they did give me penicillin shots for about 5 days running. And as soon as I could stand up again and put any weight on my leg at all, then off we went back on the trail.
And now you're on the trail. You're with one guard at this point,
I'm
right?
with me and one guard.
Named Zoo.
Going north. Yeah, it's Zoo. DZU. Zoo.
And you're hiking again, challenging terrain, and going back to the book. We continued day after day after miserable day. The journey was taking its toll, stretching my will to press on. Again, it's like you just keep getting to the bottom and finding more. Unbelievable. Each day's trek demanded more than I thought I had to give. I was able to go on only by scraping up the few remaining bits of grit that remained in the most obscure recesses of my heart and soul. I prayed, I commanded, I willed myself to take step after impossible step. That effort itself fed an agony festering within me which swelled and gnawed at my core as week followed wretched week. Malaria attacks and bouts of bloody dysentery tortured me. The pain of my broken back pierced me every day. The soles of my feet were mosaics of raised welts and open bleeding gashes and punctures. Previously broken toes throbbed as I broke them again. And as always, there was the pesky leeches. But I was still alive. And for that, I thanked God. And not only did you thank God, you also still tried to escape in that state.
That was one of the stupidest things I did in my entire captivity, though. But yes, I had that in the code of conduct: escape, escape, escape. And we had planned, even in that first jungle camp, had planned an escape from there with Wayne. But it was because of my poor condition that Wayne said, we're going to wait till you get some strength, or this isn't going to work. And then, of course, they took us off on the trip that Wayne didn't survive. But yeah, so the day that I finally did, I had an opportunity. You mentioned I was with one guard. We'd often travel with other groups of North Vietnamese going up and down the trail, and we were traveling with one such group this day. And I don't know where you're going to pick up the story. So
you can just tell.
Okay, I'll tell part. So my guard Zoo is talking to some other North Vietnamese guy, and we're all in a big group, and so they fall behind, and I'm still with the main group, but I'm kind of slowing down, and the group is moving away from me. And I came around one turn in the trail, one corner, no Zoo behind me, no group in front of me. So just in that instant, I said, this is my chance. And plus I knew about where we were, near the demilitarized zone, and we were only several miles from the coast. So that's in the back of my mind. I think I could make it. So I just took off the trail and headed up the side of a hill with my great escape, which only lasted for a very few I don't even know if it lasted 2 minutes, but a very few moments before I was recaptured. Were you going to read some of that?
Yeah, this is what happened. You do get recaptured. Here's your thoughts. I'm dead. It's all over. Zoo hovered over me, his AK-47 muzzle shifting from the center of my face to the middle of my chest. He shrieked, You, why you? His face burned red, his eyes wild in rage. Spit sprayed as he screamed at me. This is it. His fingers on the trigger. He's going to kill me. And then you. I missed the trail. I got lost. He didn't shoot. He pointed his rifle away. In a sullen voice, he commanded, Get up. You do very bad. You have big problem now. He was shaking, enraged. He motioned down the hill and said, Go. Nothing more that was ever done to me. Never heard about the incident again. My psychological assessment is he was so embarrassed and would have been in so much trouble.
And worried, I think. Yeah, well, how'd you lose your prisoner? Well, I was talking to some guy and I wasn't. Yeah, okay.
He's just like, you know what? We're just going to cover that one up.
Yeah. He was, out of all the guards that I encountered, he was about the worst, the meanest, despised me the most, I think, of almost anyone that I encountered. And lucky me, I get stuck with him being my one single guard that was moving me after I got separated from that group.
Was he with you with that original group, and then he stayed with you?
In fact, when I got to that first jungle camp living in the cages, he was our interrogator there. I almost actually felt sorry for the guy. His English was so bad, it was as bad as my high school level Spanish was. I mean, he just could barely speak English, and he's trying to interrogate us and propagandize us and all this. But yeah, so he was the only guard that really spoke any English at all. So when I had to be separated from the group, they assigned him to be the one to stay back with me and move me north.
And now, again, fast forward. You're now in a truck. You're now moving in vehicles.
Okay, we got into North Vietnam, walked all the way up across the north or to the North Vietnamese border on foot. So we're all the way just north of the demilitarized zone at this point. And then they put us on trucks to move us into North Vietnam. And inside North Vietnam, we'd some nights move in trucks, some days and nights would march depending on the threat from American airstrikes.
And of course, the trucks are these old, Soviet era things with no shocks. And by the way, you have a broken back at this point, and it's not like the roads in North Vietnam are in any kind of condition. So
when we first got on the trucks, I mean, after all this death march north, my attitude was, oh, trucks, this is wonderful. God, thank God. And got on the bed of that truck. It took about a minute and a half of driving down the road in that truck with no shocks, no springs, slam, 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 to,
And you literally had a broken back at this point.
I
It's just
literally had a
insane.
broken back. Yeah.
And of course, as you said, I think you described this to your wife as a series of unfortunate events. So
Yes.
now you're out there and you see a flare in the sky. You recognize immediately. You know what's coming. You know it's an
because
airstrike.
first two are flying Mohawks up off the coast. We would pick up targets on radar at night of the convoys moving along Highway 1 inside North Vietnam, and we'd turn it over to F-4 fighter jets from the 492nd, 97th fighter wing out of Thailand, and they were called the night fighters, and they'd drop flares and then strike the target. So yes, I knew exactly what was taking place.
So you yell out, airstrike. And then here we go, back to the book. The first F-4 screamed down from altitude and bombs exploded nearby. NVA anti-aircraft fire responded. The next F-4 screeched toward us. More bombs, more anti-aircraft. I began repeating, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. For thou art with me, good God." The earth shook. Our truck banged about as if in an earthquake. Soldiers yelled from other trucks as some were hit. The world shuddered in explosions and flames. Then it was done.
That was our first or second night on trucks after we got into North Vietnam. Yeah, so not only did I have the unpleasant bouncing around that was extremely painful, also, I think I mentioned the book, got a horrible case of heartburn that night too, so I got all this sour belches going on, and then we got that airstrike. And again, that wasn't the first or last airstrike that I experienced, but that was pretty horrific.
And they hit some of the vehicles that were with
they
you.
did.
I mean, that just
killed
means
some of the Vietnamese soldiers. Now, and I was at this point when I got right to the border, just before we got on the trucks, I was married up with a second group of South Vietnamese prisoners, senior officers, South Vietnamese prisoners. So our group of prisoners was on one truck, but yeah, other trucks in the convoy got hit and people killed, and luckily we didn't.
Now you get into another camp, and I'm going back to the book. The guards took us to a small hut with posts enough to tie our hammocks. They fastened the door shut and placed local militia guards outside. We settled in, getting comfortable and resting. The door opened. A guard came in and said something. A South Vietnamese prisoner entered behind him. Lieutenant Hung. My God, I knew. It was Wayne who had died in this camp. Captain Wayne Finch. Wayne was dead. My God. Hung stared as if at a ghost, astounded to see me alive. He cried. I sat slumped, devastated at the realization that Wayne Finch was dead. My friend Wayne, who had helped me, cared for me. My friend Wayne, who I owed so much. He was dead. Shocked, disbelieving, I introduced Hung to the others. He told us how everyone thought I was dead, how the group suffered on the march north after they left me, how 2 tall American pilots joined them, how Wayne continued to get sicker, lost hope, and grew weak. I fell into sadness, twisting it into melancholy self-pity, sinking to the lowest point I had known. And that had to be devastating.
It was. We had been separated, and when I got to this camp with the new group of South Vietnamese, when we arrived at the camp commander gave a speech, and I could hear him say "Fin, Fin," and one of the South Vietnamese officers translated for me, said, "Do you know of Finn? There was an American Finn that died in this camp." And I said, "I don't know any Finn." But what I should have put together with the bad pronunciation was Finch. Mm-hmm. And Hung had been one of the guys who helped drag me through the jungle with Sung. And as soon as I saw Hung, I knew that it was Finch. And yeah, they took me to see the grave where he was buried. And at least that rough idea of where we were helped me when I came back in my debriefs to get that location to the Americans. And eventually it took a few years or several years. Wayne's body was recovered and brought back, but that was a low morale point for me on the trip. That was devastating. You going to go into the potato story?
No, tell the potato story.
Okay, I'll tell the potatoes, because this is another guy. There are two Vietnamese. I mean, a lot of people helped me. Different people. I survived.
Tell the potato story, and then I'll wrap it up for you. Because tell the potato story.
Okay, how we do it on time? We're just going on and on and on.
We're good.
All right. Song had helped me, as we already described, but in the second group of prisoners, I came to know one Lieutenant Colonel Kay Nyem, who today lives in San Jose, California, still a dear friend. But Kay, when he was captured, had a gold cross pen. I mean, real gold, so it was a very valuable pen. When he was captured, he hid it in the lining of his uniform, and he was going to trade it for something for his own benefit when he got to wherever he was going to get to. So I'm in the state that you've described. I'm just physically a wreck now, emotionally, mentally in a low. We're being held in a hut. There's a local militia guy guarding it outside. Kay goes to the wall, thatched wall, and talks to the guy, and I see him hand his pen out to the guy. And the guy disappears. A couple hours later, the guy returns with a small bag and passes it in. In the bag were 6 potatoes. So Kay had traded his valuable gold cross pen for 6 potatoes. Had a potato cooked each day for the next 6 days for me, and I ate it. Kay wouldn't take any of the potatoes. None of the other Vietnamese senior officers would take any of the potato. They were from me. And both the physical strength the potatoes gave me, but even more importantly, just the mental lift that his sacrifice gave for me really brought me out of my doldrums there and gave me the spirit to go on.
Unbelievable. The one more thing that happens with Kay, you're getting ready to leave the camp to go to a new camp.
Right.
And Kay tapped my arm. "Look," he said. The curious militia guard who'd been so interested in learning about South Vietnam and America, who'd fetched my potatoes, stood there looking like a kid with a new puppy. He came close to the truck, and I leaned against the staked side. "Goodbye," he said, grinning. His simple humanity made me smile, and I said goodbye. Kay saw my astonishment. "He want to learn to say goodbye to you when you leave. I teach him. He good man." Yes, I thought. No doubt he is. There are good men everywhere. It's the governments, the systems, the leaders that are bad. It's communism that sucks, not the people of North Vietnam. They are not so different from the South. Not so different from me.
I learned a lot of lessons on this trip. I learned a lot of lessons about humanity and people. And I do honestly believe we are all God's children. You and I had the good fortune to be born where we were born in this wonderful country of ours. Others have had the not so good fortune. But yeah, I came across good people in Vietnam. And he, though he was my enemy, was one. Sometimes people ask me if I have any hatred for those guys and the treatment that I got, and I don't. I don't. I think they were human beings, not so different than you and me. They had their news controlled by their government, their propaganda, plus they were suffering airstrikes and everything else. They behaved the way that they behaved. I guess the one guy I still don't care much for was Tzu, but we'd probably get over it if I ever met the guy. So no, I don't have any hatred. They're just people like you and I.
And there was even times, where you're walking through a village and now you're in North Vietnam, where what you're just talking about, they'd been bombed, they lost their sons, and they're trying to basically attack you. They're throwing rocks at you.
Right.
And the guys that are guarding you actually, I don't think they shot at them, but they fired
over their heads
to protect you all.
Yes.
Which I found to be.
And my South Vietnamese friends. I mean, you'll talk to people who have experience in the Vietnam War, and you get all kinds of different opinions of the South Vietnamese and good, worthless, whatever. And they have all varieties like we are. There are some that fought valiantly and bravely, like the guys at Firebase Charlie. The people that I was with as a prisoner of war were great human beings. And when we'd get attacked, the first ring, they'd put me in, the communist guards would stick me in the middle, but then the South Vietnamese willingly would form perimeters around me, and then the guards were on the outside firing as necessary, all to protect me.
Wow. One time, going back to the book, the guards start screaming, "Be Nam Hai, Be Nam Hai."
Yeah, Bonham Hai.
Bonham Hai.
Bonham Hai.
Which means
Vietnamese. Ba B, Nam 5, Hai 2.
And for those of you that don't translate that real quick, that's B-52.
Yeah.
The bombs dropped. Hundreds of bombs fell all around us. Big bombs. Nearly on top of us. I knew there was little chance of living through a B-52 strike, but by the grace of God, no bombs fell in our crater. The earth trembled, it shook, it ruptured, and heaved. Waves of crushing pressure blasted through us, squeezing, hurting my head and ears. The suffocating pressure was painful, awful, frightening. It stopped. All was quiet. I was dead. I knew it. I felt ringing in my ears, throbbing in my head. I must be alive. Next to me, the officer sat up and holstered his pistol. By the way, the guy had drawn his pistol and held it to your head to make sure you didn't
I was going to escape
yeah.
during the B-52 strike.
Kay was moving. Others began sitting up, dazed but alive. No one could hear. No one spoke. We crawled out of the hole and started walking in the direction we'd been traveling.
Yeah, this was in North Vietnam. We'd come upon an area of a lot of bomb craters that had been bombed frequently, and then the enemy shot 2 anti-aircraft rounds. That seemed to be their signal. 2 rounds was an airstrike. And then, they started shouting Bonham High, and all hell broke loose upon us.
Now, you get to Hanoi.
Right.
And you get a bed.
Aboard.
Okay, aboard. There's a blanket, though.
There was a blanket. It gets cold in Hanoi.
And French bread. Is that hey, you called it French bread.
It was. It's like a small piece of French bread is what it looked like, but it was just, it was kind of half rotten and pieces of rock and stick and junk, and it was just...
It's funny, even in the book, because when you first talk about the French bread, French bread, and then
it brought tears to my eyes.
A couple paragraphs, or maybe a couple pages later, you're saying there was bugs in it and sticks. But when you first got that French bread...
I was put in solitary confinement in my first prison, and I was brought a meal. And now, the whole time I was captured, down in the jungle, we got a grapefruit-sized ball of rice in the morning, a grapefruit-sized ball of rice in the evening for our food. That's what we got. Hiking up the Ho Chi Minh Trail, we would, in the evenings, they would cook rice, the communists would, and we would get about that same equivalent, about a ball size of rice, and then we would roll up a ball to eat during the journey on the next morning. So it was the same thing, two grapefruit-sized balls of rice a day, and that's all that I had, with an occasional piece of manioc, and maybe some, what the heck do they call it? Bamboo shoot. Occasionally, but mostly just rice. So I get to Hanoi. I'm in solitary confinement. They bring me a meal. It's a plate of bean sprouts, a plate of bean sprouts with this piece of French bread on the side. And I'm sitting there for a lot of reasons. I knew that I was in Hanoi. I knew that this horrible trip of walking every single day and not knowing how I was going to survive through the day, all that was over. I'm here. I'm in Hanoi. Oh, plus they'd given me a bath and gave me a prison uniform and shaved me. I had not shaved the whole time, so I've been a prisoner for months. I have this huge beard. And I sat there, and they brought that food, and I cried. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I knew for the first time since I was shot down, there was no doubt in my mind I was going to survive. That was no longer a question. All I had to do was gut out those last however long it was going to be in Hanoi. They had given me this wonderful food of bean sprouts and this piece of crappy French bread, but it was wonderful.
That's, beautiful. And here's, as this continues, you're in Hanoi. I'm going back to the book. I stood in a cell about 12 feet wide and 25 feet long. 6 bunks lined up to my right, head end against the wall. 2 others lay lengthwise against the wall to my left. The bunks were 3 by 6 foot pieces of wood resting on sawhorses of the same width. Each was covered with a bamboo mat, a blanket neatly folded on one end. Between the bunks on my left, I saw 2 buckets just like the ones in my solitary cells. A row of 3 small window slits, 6 by 18 inches, opened high at the top of the back wall. 7 sets of eyes fixed on me. One approached and put out his hand. "I'm John Murphy, Captain, Air Force. How you doing?" Americans. A room full of Americans. Oh, God bless you. And that's you're with these other prisoners and
I hadn't seen another American since I split up from that group all that time ago on the trail. It was a glorious moment to come out of solitary confinement and be put in a room with 7 other guys.
And, this is one of the things that I talked about you as we were getting ready to record. I said, look, I want to read your entire book on this podcast because it's so good. And
nobody's going to want to go buy the book now. They just heard the whole book read to them.
And one of the decisions that I made was one of the things that you do in here is this is a book about you, but you do a wonderful and a beautiful job of describing and telling the stories of all these other heroes that you're with. And as a matter of fact, you call this chapter 12, In the Company of Heroes, with all these other Americans that, you told me on the way over here, and you talk about it in the book. You were there for, at this point, 6 months were you there at this point? 7 months?
Yeah, something like that.
Some of these guys had been in captivity for 3 years, 5 years,
7 years.
7 years.
And then the one guy I talk about in there, Jim Thompson, had been a prisoner for 9 years. I felt I needed to do that in this book. I had some real mixed feelings about writing this book. I didn't want to do a book focused, this happened to me story, and I did all this great stuff. I know I suffered, but there were so many other prisoners from this Southern experience. That's the story I wanted to tell. This different Southern experience is different than the prisoners who were shot down and captured in the North. So many of these guys, many of these guys suffered so much more than I did, spent so much more time in captivity than I did. So I do share those stories of those guys in the company of heroes. When I got to Hanoi, got into the prison at Plantation Gardens, I met these other guys, and they had the truly incredible, heroic stories to share.
And you do a phenomenal job in the book of describing, them, who they were, what they've been through. Bill Gaunt, Al Kroboff, John Parcells, Bill Thomas, Bill Henderson, Dave Mott. Just you go through the guys.
Yeah, those were the guys in my cell, and I don't know if you caught in there. Out of the 8 guys in the cell, 4 of us were named Bill. That's just crazy. 8 Americans in a cell, and 4 of us named Bill. So I became New Bill. There was Bill Gant was an Air Force pilot, about 6'4", 6'5". He was Big Bill. There was a Marine warrant officer who was some prehistoric elderly gentleman. The poor guy was 36 years old. We couldn't believe he'd survived. But he was Old Bill, and then we had an Air Force OV-10 pilot who became Young Bill. So we had 4 Bills out of the 8 guys. But yeah, then the others, and those guys had all suffered too. But then there were other guys in the camp. Dennis Thompson and Harvey Brand. 2 Special Forces guys captured along Vay, their experiences, so many others, five guys from a TV station in Way who were captured in Tet. I mean, who would think that a TV station crew would get captured? But they had all of their trials and tribulations. And then, the most was Jim Thompson in his 9 years of suffering as a prisoner of war. And
one of the guys I do want to highlight is Colonel Ted Guy. So I'm going to go to the book.
Yeah, our senior ranking officer. Yep, please.
And someone's briefing you, kind of telling you what's going on. And here's what Dave says. Dave Mott. He says the SRO, that's the senior ranking officer for the camp, is Colonel Ted Guy. He's in the shed up on top of the camp. That's where they've segregated the senior officers and NCOs from the rest of us. He's an Air Force lieutenant colonel who must have been promoted to full bird by now. He went down over Laos in an F-4 in 1968. He's a good leader and a real hard ass. He runs a tight ship, doesn't allow making any propaganda statements. No one can accept early release. We live by the code of conduct. He's taken a lot of beatings and torture for us. We call him the Hawk. Al Kroboth jumped in immediately. Yeah, and we're Hawk's heroes. Just like Hogan's heroes on the TV show, only we don't have as much fun. He had a shit-eating grin on his face. He also looked like crap. So I thought it was, that's one of the, you go through all these guys and what they've done. And you also talk about some of those heroes that held the line, and you also talk about another group who I'll go to here.
Okay.
Sometimes I could hear a lot of noise from the other side of the wall separating our row of cells from those on the further end of our building. I could see the top of a basketball hoop, an occasional volleyball arched high over an out-of-sight net. What's up with that? I asked. That's the Peace Committee, came the answer. What's the Peace Committee? 8 guys who collaborate with the enemy. They've been ordered to stop, but they won't. They study communism, do propaganda, make radio broadcasts, even rat on other Americans. For that, they get packages, get to write letters, and can go outside whenever they want and play games. We call them the Ducks because of the way they follow the guards around and do their bidding. They'll rot in hell, I said. That they will. The collaborators were but a small but significant minority among us. There were 107 prisoners at Plantation Gardens, and except for the 8 in the Peace Committee, all were patriotic, loyal Americans who resisted enemy interrogations, propaganda, and pressure to sign statements and make radio broadcasts. We resisted with everything we had. And then, go into
tying those guys back to Colonel Guy. I can't say enough about Colonel Guy, and he's passed away several years ago now. But what a strong leader. And we talk about military discipline and the requirement for it, and officers this and NCOs that and whatever. In prison camp, that discipline was so essential and so sought after by everyone. And we were lucky to have Colonel Guy as our senior ranking officer. He was so tough and by the rules and the code. And thank goodness, because that's what we all needed to hear and to have that standard to live by. Just a great and wonderful human being. When we got back, there were several who would have strangled some of those Peace Committee guys, especially some of our Special Forces guys who were captured with us. But Colonel Guy put out an order, and he said, this is a direct order. Everyone stay away from the Peace Committee. I'm going to take care of this. I got it. Don't you do anything. And Colonel Guy pressed charges against the Peace Committee again and again, was overridden. Charges were never brought against them, but what did happen is Colonel Guy's career was curtailed far before it should have been. But I have the deepest respect for him as our senior officer.
Yeah. And again, I'm gonna say this again. You go through these stories of some of the other heroes. You just mentioned Dennis Thomas, Thompson. Harvey Brand, Bill Murray. I mean, you go through these stories, and then they're just all phenomenal, and you do them such an honor telling their stories. So buy this book so that you can read these stories, because I don't have time to go through them all here.
Right.
The one thing I want to point out, though, is going back to the book, we also tried to keep our humor going within the cell. And Al and me, as the central culprits, telling disgustingly bad jokes back and forth. Al was getting a lot better. His nausea was subsiding because he was really sick. His nausea was subsiding and his boils healing. Some of the guys exercised to fight the deterioration of their bodies. I couldn't even lie on my back, let alone trying to do sit-ups. What I could do was try to get into a position to try push-ups. I tried once in the jungle and failed. I couldn't raise myself up off the ground. Now I was able to push all the way up once and halfway through a second. Pretty sad for a guy who could do 100 push-ups before. I kept at it for weeks until I was able to do several as part of my daily routine. And the reason I point that out is because I always say, because people get injured, people come with sickness, do what you can.
Yes.
And do what you can, and that's exactly what you are doing. So important. December 18th, 1972, after many weeks of quiet, we got bombed like none of us had ever been bombed before. Air raid sirens wailed, barrages of SAMs fired, and bombs poured down. American B-52s had arrived in force over Hanoi. Bombs fell close and plantation gardens shook. We lay on our bunks, hoping our bombers knew where our camp was. Still, we fell back into a mindset we'd all developed in captivity. What will be, will be.
Yep.
No sense in worrying about something you absolutely have no control over, which is the
we're
conversation
not going to stop
have.
a bomb from landing on our head. That was the Christmas bombing in 1972 that Nixon ordered to finally bring the communists to
the bargaining table.
Yeah.
And I had to put this part in here. I had to read it. So after that massive bombing, repercussion. So there's a guard that you had nicknamed Repercussion.
Right.
Repercussion, a guard so named because of his violent outbursts and threats against prisoners, stood against the wall as we milled around the water trough. He spoke some English. Old Bill Thomas walked over to him and said, "You think those airstrikes were bad?" "What?" the guard asked. "You think those airstrikes were bad last night?" Bill said again. "Yes, bad bombing." "Well, you ain't seen nothing yet. Wait till they drop an A-bomb on your fucking ass." I gasped and smiled. Old Bill, proud Marine. He'd been a pretty quiet guy, but not anymore. We all glowed inside after the bombing. It was a huge morale boost. The bombings went on night after night, not without impunity. B-52s got shot down, their ghastly giant carcasses burning, falling. We wondered sadly about the fate of the crews. We lost aircraft, yet they kept coming. Quietly, we cheered them on.
Yeah, that was a huge morale boost. And Bill Thomas, boy, bless his heart, because he was always kind of a quiet guy, but he just let it all out that morning.
That's so awesome. Okay, now we're in the Hanoi Hilton, the infamous Hanoi
Hilton. They moved us in the middle of all that bombing attacks. They loaded us up one night on trucks at the plantation gardens and drove around. I don't know, it seemed like for a couple hours. I think they're just trying to disorient us. We thought they were taking us out in the country because of the bombings. Mm-hmm. Then they came to a stop, and we got out of the trucks and found out we were only a few blocks or several blocks from where we'd started at the Hanoi Hilton.
And now they set up like a little movie night for you guys.
Oh, yeah.
At the Hanoi Hilton, a little movie night, and they set you down for the movie night. You guys are making fun of the projector operator, and finally they tell you quiet, no talk, and then the movie starts. Back to the book. The film was of Jane Fonda visiting North Vietnam. We saw an American cavorting among the enemy leadership, supporting their cause. Scenes appeared of her climbing into the gunner's seat on an NVA anti-aircraft gun, wearing a clean white blouse, smiling broadly, laughing, donning a North Vietnamese army helmet with live ammunition at her feet that would later shoot down American planes. In the film, she sent a message to American servicemen calling us war criminals. She said we were following the orders of other war criminals that were like the leaders of Germany and Japan in World War II, who were executed for their crimes. I was stunned. We didn't dare speak out loud, but we had plenty to say to each other when we got back inside our cell. Days later, they showed us some news clippings from American newspapers and magazines. They all had news of war protests. One was former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark demanding that Americans stop bombing North Vietnamese dikes. He had been Attorney General under President Johnson during the buildup of American forces in Vietnam. Now he was making statements from Hanoi that it was inhumane to bomb dikes and that we should never do it again. A photo showed him standing beside a dike with a single bomb crater. I knew he did not have an air campaign to destroy the dikes. This was an errant bomb. The war protesters at home never bothered me. In fact, I took pride in fighting communism in this far corner of the earth so Americans could have the right to protest in the streets. It was a sacred honor to defend the right of other Americans to disagree with me or anything within our American system of government.
Yeah, and I do believe that so strongly. The core of our democracy is not that we all get in line and March 4th, take us to 1984. The strength of our American democracy is we can have different views and people disagree. And the health of the democracy is when those disagreements can be argued and discussed, and then you reach a solution, a democratic solution, and you go forward. That's the beauty of our system. So, yeah, it never bothered me. Even during the war, I'd come up, people say, isn't this horrible with these guys? I said, no, exactly what I said there.
Right.
I am fighting as an American soldier to defend the American way of life, which is democratic disagreement and argument. So have at it, guys. You want to protest? Go protest.
Beautiful.